Emily's perfectly manicured nails curled around the handle of the coffee pot, the glint of her Cartier watch barely visible beneath the cuff of her silk blouse. At first glance, it might have seemed like she was simply playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, serving coffee at her in-laws' business meeting out of obligation. But that wasn't the case. No, this was a role forced upon her, another expectation placed on her shoulders by Barbara, her ever-patronizing mother-in-law. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today I want to share another touching story with you. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, it motivates us to create more quality content for you. Let's continue. Careful not to spill, Barbara sneered, tugging at the lapel of her ill-fitting, knockoff designer blazer. We wouldn't want you embarrassing the family more than you already have. A wave of quiet laughter rippled through the room, except from Jason, Emily's husband, who suddenly found the screen of his laptop far more interesting. After 5 years of marriage, Jason had perfected the art of staying silent, choosing avoidance over confrontation, even when it came at his wife's expense. Emily's hands remained steady as she poured. Her Stanford MBA, her sharp business acumen, and the truth about her position, the unseen force behind one of the nation's most powerful tech conglomerates, were still safely tucked away, hidden at Jason's insistence to keep the peace. Barbara's voice sliced through the murmurs in the room. Hurry up, coffee girl. Our CEO will be here any minute, and we need to look professional. Ah, the so-called acquisition offer. Emily suppressed a knowing smirk. She already understood exactly what was happening. Her company, Novatech Industries, had been quietly acquiring shares of her in-laws' floundering business for months. Today's meeting wasn't just about negotiations, it was about sealing their fate. The conference room door swung open, and a familiar voice filled the air. Apologies for the delay. Ryan Mitchell, Novatech's public-facing CEO, strode inside, his usual confident demeanor unwavering, until his eyes landed on Emily, still holding the coffee pot. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Mrs. Thompson? Just Emily, she said smoothly, taking in Barbara's bewildered expression. Cream and sugar? Ryan quickly masked his surprise, though his glance held an unspoken question. Black, please. Thank you. Barbara practically shoved Emily aside in her eagerness to take center stage. Mr. Mitchell, it's such an honor to have you here, she gushed. Please, ignore our daughter-in-law. She's just helping out since we couldn't secure proper catering today. Ryan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Your daughter-in-law? Barbara let out an exaggerated sigh. Unfortunately, she muttered. But let's focus on business. We received your offer last week, though, frankly, it's much lower than we anticipated. Emily casually leaned against the wall, pulling out her phone as she tapped out a quick message to Ryan. Play along. You'll understand soon. Clearing his throat, Ryan nodded. Perhaps before we discuss numbers, we should take a deeper look at the company's current financial standing. Barbara launched into a well-rehearsed speech about their so-called legacy, boasting about their strong market position while conveniently neglecting the reality, their plummeting sales, their growing debts, and the undeniable truth that they were on the verge of collapse. Emily had seen the real numbers. Without outside intervention, they wouldn't last another quarter. And of course, Barbara concluded with an air of smugness, with my son Jason taking over as CEO next month, we expect to see exponential growth. Emily's phone buzzed, notifications from her real world, the one that Barbara refused to acknowledge. Her next board meeting was starting soon. I need to step out, she said, gathering her things. Barbara scoffed. Typical. No respect for family matters. This is exactly why we're keeping the business in real family hands. Emily smiled, finally ready to shed the pretense. Actually, I have a board meeting to attend, Ryan. I'll see you there. Ryan's grin was instant, knowing. Of course, Madam CEO. The room fell into a stunned, almost deafening silence. The only sound was the delicate clink of Barbara's champagne glass slipping from her fingers, shattering as it hit the floor. CEO? Jason stammered, his face draining of color. He looked at Emily as if she had suddenly become a stranger. Emily, what is going on? She tilted her head slightly, feigning curiosity. Perhaps, she said smoothly, we should clarify who is acquiring whom. She let the words settle for a moment before continuing, her voice steady. Novatech Industries, my company, currently owns 70% of your business. Today's offer is for the remaining 30. Barbara's face contorted in disbelief. That's impossible. Her voice wavered, but the denial was instant, almost instinctual. We would have known. Would you? Emily slid a sleek black folder onto the table, her manicured fingers resting lightly on the cover. Like you knew about the shell companies buying up your stock? Or the real reason your biggest contracts were mysteriously cancelled last quarter? She tapped the folder. Everything is documented. Right here. Jason snatched at the papers, his fingers trembling as he flipped through them. His voice cracked with desperation. You've been spying on us? On your own family? Spying? Emily let out a quiet, amused chuckle. No, Jason. I conducted due diligence. Something you might have noticed if you'd actually read the reports I gave you last year. She folded her arms, watching realization creep into his expression. But instead, you chose to believe your mother when she told you I was just meddling in family business. Barbara's hand shook as she scanned the numbers, the brutal, undeniable truth staring back at her. These figures, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They can't be right. Ryan, ever professional, gave a small nod. Mrs. Thompson, Emily has been thorough. Everything checks out. Barbara's gaze snapped to Emily, her expression caught somewhere between rage and dawning horror. All this time, serving coffee, letting us believe you were just the coffee girl? Emily adjusted the sleeve of her Chanel blazer, the same one Barbara had once dismissed as too flashy for a housewife. While you were too busy scheming to keep me in my place, she said coolly, I was learning everything about your company. She leaned forward just slightly. And it wasn't hard. Your weaknesses were glaring. Jason's voice wavered as he grasped at the last remnants of control. We'll fight this. Our lawyers. Your lawyers? Emily cut in, her smile turning razor sharp. They work for the board, not your family. And as of today, she leaned back, enjoying the final blow, the board works for me. Barbara let out a strangled gasp as she collapsed into her chair, as if the weight of her mistakes had finally become too much to bear. Why, she whispered. Why go through all of this? Why the act? Emily exhaled, allowing herself a moment of reflection. 5 years ago, I offered to help, she said, her voice steady but laced with something raw. I had the expertise. The connections. The capital. Everything needed to fix this company. And you, she turned her gaze to Barbara, looked me straight in the eye and said, what was it again? She tapped her chin in mock thought before her eyes darkened. Ah, yes. Gold digger. Daughters-in-law should know their place. Barbara flinched, but Emily was already glancing at her watch. Speaking of places, she said lightly, I have a company to run. Ryan? Ryan smirked, stepping aside as Emily strode toward the exit. Behind her, Jason's voice broke through the tension. Emily, wait. We can talk about this. She paused just long enough to glance back at him. Like we talked about it last Christmas? Her voice was quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. When your mother announced you as CEO and you just sat there while she told me I should focus on more suitable activities, like planning dinner parties? She shook her head, a hint of finality in her expression. That time has passed, Jason. She straightened her shoulders. Now it's time for business. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she stepped into the waiting elevator, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman Barbara had never truly seen. Not just a daughter-in-law. Not just Jason's wife. A force of nature. As the door slid shut, her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. Brilliantly played, boss. Board's ready when you are. Emily smiled. The real work would begin tomorrow: restructuring, innovation, leadership. But today? Today was about justice, served with a side of irony. And a perfect cup of coffee. The elevator doors slid open to the lobby, where a group of board members stood waiting. Mrs. Thompson. They greeted her with the kind of respect they had never shown before. It was subtle but unmistakable, the shift in power, the realization of who truly held the reins now. Beyond them, through the towering glass doors, Emily could see the growing crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were raised, and voices murmured in anticipation. Word traveled fast in the business world, especially when it involved a corporate coup wrapped in family drama. She straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the lapel of her blazer. Let them write their stories. Let them tell the world about the coffee girl who became the CEO. Let them dissect how an underestimated daughter-in-law had outmaneuvered an entire dynasty. But more than anything, let them watch. Watch as she took this sinking, outdated family business and transformed it into something extraordinary. Stepping into the sunlight, she lifted her chin, ready to face the press. The press conference ended in a standing ovation. Emily had just unveiled her strategic vision for the company, an ambitious digital transformation, a shift towards sustainable manufacturing practices, and, most importantly, a guarantee of job security for all current employees. The message was clear: under her leadership, competence would replace nepotism. As she stepped down from the podium, the reporters surged forward. Mrs. Thompson, one called out. What will your in-law's role be in the company moving forward? Emily smiled, her expression effortlessly diplomatic. All personnel decisions will be made based on merit and qualification. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment before adding, now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to attend. She barely glanced at her phone as she walked away, though it had been vibrating non-stop since the morning's revelation. Missed calls from Jason. Dozens of frantic text messages from Barbara. And, surprisingly, an email from her father-in-law, Richard. You've outplayed us all. I should have listened 5 years ago when you warned me about our outdated systems. The company is yours now. Just, take care of our employees. Emily exhaled slowly. At least one of them had the grace to accept defeat. The board meeting was brief and decisive. Her restructuring plan passed unanimously. By the time evening fell, the company's stock had surged nearly 20% on news of the acquisition. Investors weren't mourning the fall of the Thompson family, they were celebrating the arrival of real leadership. Emily finally left the office just after sunset. As she stepped into the parking garage, she wasn't surprised to find Jason leaning against her car, arms crossed, eyes burning with frustration. You've reached a new low, he spat the moment he saw her. Using our marriage to spy on my family's business? Emily remained calm as she unlocked her car. Interesting, she mused. 5 years of watching your mother humiliate me was perfectly acceptable. But protecting a company and its employees from incompetent management? That's a new low? Jason's jaw tightened. Mom was right about you all along, he said through clenched teeth. You're nothing but a... Careful, Jason. Emily cut him off, her tone cool but firm. Your prenup becomes void if you publicly disparage me. Section 5, paragraph 3. She arched a brow. You know, the clause your mother insisted on? Ironically enough. His face turned an angry shade of red. You won't get away with this. Emily opened her car door. Oh, but I already have. She paused, looking at him one last time. And Jason? I've taken the liberty of moving my things out of the house. She smiled faintly. The divorce papers will be on your desk tomorrow morning. She slid into the driver's seat, shutting the door with a quiet click. But before pulling away, she rolled down the window just enough to add one final note. Don't worry, she said lightly. I'm not interested in your personal assets. Her fingers drummed against the steering wheel. I have a company to run. And with that, she drove away, watching Jason's stunned expression shrink in her rearview mirror. Minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Barbara. You'll regret this. No one will ever trust you in business again. Emily laughed out loud, shaking her head. Her inbox was already full of congratulatory messages from CEOs, investors, and industry leaders, all impressed by her masterful execution. In the world of business, strategic brilliance commanded respect. Not family politics. The next few weeks brought the expected drama. Barbara tried rallying family shareholders to overturn the takeover, only to discover that Emily's contracts were airtight, crafted with the very legal team the Thompsons had once dismissed as unnecessary. Jason attempted to claim his rightful position as CEO. His confidence evaporated, however, when the board subjected him to formal interviews, during which it became painfully clear that he lacked even the most basic understanding of the company's operations. His humiliation was complete when a veteran board member leaned forward and dryly asked, "And what exactly is your relevant experience, besides inheriting your last name?" Silence. Barbara had spent years trying to keep Emily in her place. She never realized Emily was building an empire right under her nose. And now? That empire belonged to her. Jason sat stiffly in the conference room, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair as if they could anchor him to the position he was so desperate to claim. Across the polished table, Emily remained composed, her gaze cool and unwavering. "Your mother's influence won't help you here," she told him, her voice steady. Jason swallowed hard, but she gave him no time to respond. "We need a CEO who understands modern business practices, not someone who was handed the title through nepotism." The silence that followed was suffocating. The board members, once loyal to the Thompson family, now watched Jason with barely concealed skepticism. His resume was a joke compared to hers. His understanding of the company? Surface level, at best. Jason had spent years benefiting from the privilege of his last name. But in her company, legacy meant nothing without competence. The transformation of Thompson Industries began immediately. Under Emily's leadership, long overdue reforms were set in motion. Automated systems replaced outdated processes. A structured HR department was established to put an end to the nepotistic hiring practices that had plagued the company for years. Financial reporting became transparent, cutting off the quiet siphoning of funds that had once fueled the Thompsons' lavish lifestyle. The results were undeniable. Employees, once overworked and undervalued, began to thrive in an environment that rewarded merit over connections. Productivity skyrocketed, efficiency increased by 30% in the first month alone. The culture of fear and favoritism dissolved, replaced by innovation and ambition. For the first time in years, Thompson Industries was a company worth working for. 3 months after the takeover, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Barbara stepped into her office, looking far less polished than usual. The pristine designer outfits, the diamond-studded accessories, gone. "I sold my house," Barbara announced, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Emily barely looked up from her reports. "The one you used to brag about?" she asked mildly. Barbara nodded stiffly. "Turns out maintaining appearances is expensive when you're not siphoning company funds." Emily didn't bother to hide her smirk. "Imagine that." Barbara hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. "All these years, serving coffee, enduring our comments, why didn't you just tell us who you were?" Emily finally set her pen down, folding her hands over the desk. "Would you have believed me?" she asked evenly. "Or would you have pushed Jason to divorce me and marry someone more suitable?" Barbara flinched. "We're family," she tried weakly. "No," Emily corrected. "We were never family. I was the outsider you tolerated because Jason refused to marry your friend's daughter." Her voice remained calm, but there was an undeniable weight behind her words. "I was the coffee girl you used to humiliate so you could feel better about your insecurities." She leaned back in her chair. "And now, you think I've taken everything from you." Barbara said nothing. Emily stood, walking to the window, staring out at the city skyline. I didn't take anything, she said quietly. This company was 3 months from bankruptcy. Your employees, the ones you claim to care about, were about to lose everything. I saved this company from your family's mismanagement. Barbara's shoulders slumped, her bravado collapsing. And Jason? She asked hesitantly. Emily sighed. Jason made his choice every time he sat there in silence while you belittled me. She turned, meeting Barbara's eyes. The divorce will be finalized next week. Barbara had nothing left to say. She simply nodded, then left. That evening, Emily received another email from Richard. Watched your presentation to the shareholders today. Finally saw what Jason and Barbara were too proud to admit. You are exactly what this company needed. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. Emily exhaled, staring at the screen for a moment before closing her laptop. At least one Thompson had the decency to admit their mistakes. 1 year after the takeover, Emily stood before an auditorium packed with employees, investors, and executives at the company's annual meeting. The stock price had doubled. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. Thompson Industries had expanded into 3 new markets in the past year alone. Emily looked out at the crowd and smiled. Someone told me today that I was just the coffee girl once, she said, letting the words settle. I want to thank them. She paused, scanning the room. Because sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. The applause was deafening. That evening, as Emily worked late in her office, her assistant knocked gently on the door. Someone here to see you, she said, stepping aside. A familiar figure walked in, Amanda, the woman Barbara had once handpicked for Jason. Emily raised an eyebrow. Amanda. Amanda cleared her throat, looking more nervous than Emily had ever seen her. I heard you're hiring for a management position. She hesitated before continuing. I know this is awkward, given everything, but I have an MBA from Harvard. And unlike Jason, I actually earned it myself. Emily studied her for a long moment. You know what the hardest part of success is, Amanda? She asked finally. Amanda shook her head. Remembering to give others the chances you wish someone had given you. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Let's talk about your qualifications. 2 years after the takeover, an unexpected envelope arrived at Emily's office. A wedding invitation. Jason was remarrying, a real estate agent, someone far from the corporate world Barbara had once envisioned for him. Barbara, now living in Florida, reportedly spent her days bitterly telling anyone who would listen about her scheming ex-daughter-in-law. Emily chuckled as she signed the card for her wedding gift. She sent Jason and his new bride a coffee maker. Inside was a note. Some people serve coffee. Others build empires. Congratulations on your wedding. Best wishes, your ex-CEO. And every morning, as she arrived at work, Emily would smile at the gleaming new company logo hanging in the lobby. Moda. The name of the empire she built from the ruins of a failing dynasty. Because success, she had learned, was best served with a side of humble beginnings. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Share this video with your loved ones, it might brighten their day or give them a new perspective. And before you go, check out the video on your screen. It's another heartfelt story you won't want to miss.